This is Alistair Coburn. You're listening to Agile Uprising Podcast.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Agile Uprising Podcast. I'm your host, Troy Lightfoot, and with me I have a special guest, Siim or Siim. Siim, how do you pronounce your name again?
It's Siim, and but
Siim,
yeah, a lot
okay.
of people say like Sim or Slim even, but yeah, both are fine.
So Siim has an awesome YouTube channel called Siimland, and also an awesome Patreon. So we'll be talking a little bit about that. So Siim, why don't you give a brief introduction about yourself?
Sure, like you mentioned, I have a YouTube channel, and in addition to that, like I do also like a lot of other online content creation, like in my blog. I have some books, and I have my own podcast as well. And generally, I do like public speaking as well, some coaching and things like that. But generally, like the topics I do cover include human optimization with this thing called like biohacking and general nutrition, exercise, and sleep, and everything included to kind of just optimize your health as well as to increase your performance and to not have these long-term trade-offs in terms of like longevity and such. So I kind of focus on making you better, stronger, faster, smarter, everything related to that, and live and feel awesome at the same time.
So what are we talking about today? So so I'm what's called an Agile coach. So I'm a coach as well, and I think as coaches and in the community, we focus heavily on process. We focus heavily on people, culture, and technical skills. But all of these things, and related to software development, particularly because software development is a knowledge work and it's a creative work. It requires, let's just, for simplicity's sake, let's call it a lot of brain power. Okay. And not only that power, but also creativity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And focus. So, I never really heard anyone talking about how to optimize the thing that drives all of this, and that's your brain.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, maybe people have in the community, but I haven't heard it. So I just wanted to kind of possibly start a series on these topics, right? So if all knowledge and creative work is coming from the brain, perhaps we should put an emphasis there. So that's kind of the juxta of this podcast, and maybe once in the future,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I'm just gonna kick it off and then send this to you after I kind of get through the first question. Is that I think we should talk maybe about different fuel sources today for your
Mm-hmm.
brain, because I don't think everyone knows that your brain actually has two fuel sources, and that they're pretty dramatically different as far as the impact they have on your brain. And also maybe we can talk about a little bit about optimizing sleep and how important that is, and maybe some tips for that, and as well as physical activity, right? So that's kind of the outline of where I'm thinking today. All right. So there are different types of energy sources that your brain can utilize, right? So maybe, Siim, if you could just go into your thoughts on the difference between using glucose for an energy source, and ketones, and what that even means, right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe as a background there from your experience.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Like, well, first of all, I think we have to start from that, the brain itself is one of the most important organs of your entire body. And it's also one of the biggest kind of drainers or energy consumers. It weighs less than 2% of your total body weight, but it consumes about 20% of your daily calories. So it's like a really hungry beast almost. And it's very important to kind of maintain like a stable energy source to the brain, so you wouldn't go into like low blood sugar levels, or you wouldn't experience other kind of shutdown situations where you lack energy and such. And yeah, like the body itself also uses like different fuel sources. Like you said, like glucose is the main default energy source that we get from things like carbohydrates and starchy tubers and things like that. But those things from an evolutionary perspective, they're not always available. And in the wild, there isn't like long periods of constantly having access to carbohydrates and glucose. So hunter-gatherers occasionally experience periods of famine and starvation where their body isn't going to, die off because of that. Instead, they actually kind of adapt to that sort of a deprivation in carbohydrates. And that's the point where the body starts mobilizing a lot of the fat stores that it has, and it converts the fatty acids into ketones. So those ketones are this byproduct of fatty acid metabolism that help the brain and body to survive these periods of low glucose and low carbohydrate intake and fasting as well. So it's like a very adaptive mechanism, and it's very natural. In the wild, it would happen, naturally, but in the modern world, we don't really tap into it, and that can cause some, issues. So, like from the perspective of what's the difference between glucose and ketones, then the brain actually kind of runs better on ketones because of their, they're more stable. They don't get depleted that quickly as glucose. There's only like a very limited amount of carbohydrates your body can store in one sitting, and whenever you run out of those carbohydrates, then you kind of experience this sort of a drop in energy. You start to feel tired, lethargic, you get brain fog, and you want to eat to kind of raise your blood sugar levels again. But if you were to have more ketones present in the blood, then those ketones would, immediately replace that need, and you would get access. You would basically be tapping into this unlimited amount of energy that is in your body fat and adipose tissue. And once you become keto adapted, and then that process gets very easy, and you're going to get more energy from the fat stores that you already have, and you become less dependent of glucose. You're going to have like stable energy all the time, stable blood sugar, and the brain doesn't need that much glucose. And in terms of energy production, then ketones, the ketone bodies that get created from fatty acid metabolism, those are actually they can produce more ATP as well, like 25% more ATP than glucose. ATP is like the energy currency of the cells that like is required for every metabolic process and every physiological function to be carried out. So they're quite kind of really amazing fuel sources in terms of surviving through periods of low caloric intake and low energy availability. But they are also great to kind of keep the brain energized and to keep the energy flowing more stably.
Okay, so let's walk through a day in the life of Siim, right? So before you started, I'm assuming that most of the time, and I could be wrong, but most of the time you would be running on ketones in your personal life. Is that correct?
Yeah, in my own personal life, I follow the ketogenic diet, and I do other activities as well that's going to increase the availability of ketones in my blood. So the ketones themselves, they don't get created, by themselves. They're not that easily. They're like they are like supposed to be this sort of adaptive mechanism to glucose and glycogen depletion. So if you are eating the standard diet that is high in carbohydrates and with a very high meal frequency, then you're not going to be tapping into this metabolic state of ketosis, because your body doesn't feel the need to do it, because there's energy all around. So the ketogenic diet is basically mimicking the physiological effects of a fasted state by lowering your daily carbohydrate intake and allowing the body to produce more of those ketone bodies and to kind of keep itself in this nutritional ketosis.
So I know a lot of people, they get they have some trepidations about diet, right? So I think we'll talk about, the ketogenic diet is one way, and probably the best way to use ketones as a fuel source. There are some other ways as well, so maybe we can talk about that after we get through like the the differences between ketones and glucose. So let's say, a day in a life of your own, and I can give you my experiences, but from, let's call it, a burning glucose or using glucose as an energy source to now mainly using ketones. What have you noticed personally yourself as far as differences when it comes to energy, when it comes to cognitive ability, or any other differences?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, then the brain actually kind of runs better on those ketone bodies. And one of the biggest things that I definitely notice, and other people as well, is that you have like this very stable energy throughout the entire day, and you're not dependent on food at all. Like you're virtually running on your own body fat all the time, and you don't get hungry, you don't get these energy crashes, and you don't get like brain fog or anything like that either. You're kind of very stable and like experience a lot of mental clarity. And in addition to that, the ketones themselves have many other anti-inflammatory properties as well. So that's going to be generally good for like overall health and overall cognitive health as well. So the ketogenic diet has been used to treat like epilepsy and autism, and even prevent like Alzheimer's and cognitive decline. So like for the brain and cellular health, then being in this ketogenic state is extremely beneficial. And I also feel that whenever I am like in a very deep ketosis, then I usually also feel like this heightened sense of mental acuity and focus, because of having like because of like this mimicking this kind of a deep or like a borderline starvation state almost. It's not like physiological starvation, but it's simply like the elevation of ketones itself feels, or like from a natural perspective, if you were to be fasting for several days, then you would go into like very deep ketosis, and you would actually feel very clear and sharp, so that you would basically be motivated to get access to food more easily, and to get access to like meat and things like that to refeed yourself. So that's what I like. That's what I like to think as well, that ketosis is like a very stable and also like a very focused energy state.
Yeah, so I give you a personal example. So it's been 40 hours since I've eaten anything. So, and it's 5:54 a.m. and I'm wide awake and I have a ton of energy. So, and I'm pretty focused. And before I even started fasting, I think my blood ketone levels were like 1.1 millimolar. So that was pre-fasting. So
nice.
I'm expecting that's probably higher now. I just don't measure it. But
yeah, so, like that's like a good point of like a lot of people who are eating like a standard diet, then whenever they skip a meal or when they don't have enough food during their meal time, then they're eventually going to crash after a few hours, and usually their blood sugar is going to drop significantly, and they're going to feel like this hypoglycemic response where they get lethargic, they get swelling, and they start sweating and really hungry. So they even get like emotional turmoil, and they're gonna get like this hangry experience where they want food. But once you shift into ketosis, then that thing is going to be not an issue, because your brain will still get access to energy, and it's not going to be demanding for glucose. Sugar cravings and hypoglycemic responses, those are mainly caused by the brain going into an energy crisis and needing glucose. But once you don't need that much glucose after becoming keto adapted, then you won't experience those things as well, and you can get away with like even having very low blood sugar. And a lot of people also who have done like these extended fasts for 3 to 5 days, their blood sugar is very low. Like when I did my last 5-day fast, then my blood sugar was like 50 milligrams per deciliter, which is like very low. And it's medically, it's like hypoglycemic. I should have been hospitalized, but my ketones were also very high, and that kind of counterbalanced it completely. And I was still able to work out, and I was, completely clear. So that's kind of an amazing adaptation for like general well-being as well.
Yeah. So awesome. So before we get to the context of agile teams and software development teams, maybe we can talk about, actually, you know what? Let's get right to that for now. So I'm going to paint a picture for you that you have 8 people that are building a product together. Okay. And they all have different skill sets. Some of them are overlapping, but it requires a high level of focus, a high level of communication, collaboration. Okay. And mistakes can be very costly, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, in that scenario, essentially, that's what we're talking about when we talk about agile software development teams, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, in that scenario, think about how one person kind of using ketones as a fuel source versus the whole team using ketones as a fuel source, how that might benefit a team. Because I have this hypothesis that I would love to do an experiment where we take like one team, right? And kind of measure their performance when it comes to either output or outcomes or motivation or happiness or anything that it basically involves the brain, right? Quality,
Mm-hmm.
different things like that, and measure it like pre using ketones as a fuel source, and then like 2-3 months later measure it again, along the way. And I have a hypothesis that you would see pretty dramatic different results. So maybe if you can think about that context, I wouldn't worry about software development itself so much, but just the fact that 8 people are going to have to use their brains pretty intensively for knowledge and creative work and collaborate all the time. So, what are your thoughts about what might that look like, and what kind of benefits would using ketones as a fuel source give that team?
Well, I think like that would be like an A team, basically. I would imagine like completely very increased performance, not just like personal performance, but also like in terms of the communication between the team members. Like obviously the advantage of being able to stay focused for longer periods of time and to dedicate more cognitive power to the work itself is like an invaluable thing in the workplace. I myself, like I do a lot of creative work. I do a lot of cognitive work, like writing and editing videos and being online in front of a computer all day. And I definitely attribute a lot of my productivity and success to this ketotic state where my brain is constantly on fire and running on full gear. But in addition to the like the team communication, then that will also be quite interesting to see, because let's say if there's the potential issue of if one team member is like toxic, or if they're constantly angry or they're negative, then they eventually gonna drag down the entire motivation of the team. So if partly that is can be caused by this hangry syndrome where the brain is running into an energy crisis, and they're literally
Right.
can't think of anything else but food and keeping themselves energized. So yeah, I would imagine that people would be nicer to themselves if they don't get that much, if their brain wouldn't get robbed from the constant search of carbohydrates or sugars or something like that. And I would imagine like that would definitely be like a good productivity boost for the entire team. But I wouldn't, in terms of like I myself, when I'm working alone, then I usually eat like just one meal a day, and I do a lot of like intermittent fasting and time restricted feeding. So that's not an issue for me either individually, but in the context of a team, then they can still have like some sort of lunch breaks or something like that can bring the team together, and they would eat like a keto meal or something, or you drink something like the bulletproof coffee or something, that to simply get out of the work mode for just a moment, and to kind of collaborate more and share their results, and to optimize it further.
Right. So, a personal example. So, I can tell you that I started this kind of using ketones as a fuel source in January of this year. January 2nd actually was like the first day. I went into ketosis. And it's like night and day for me as far as my energy levels, as far as my even results at work. I feel like I'm much more creative now. I can go much longer periods of time working without getting tired. In fact, I come back from lunch and everyone's tired and I'm just like full of energy, right? So now I've even switched to the first 6 months. I just did just ketogenic diet, and then I started adding intermittent fasting, and then it even became like an additional layer of energy, on top of that. In fact, I do a lot of trainings as well, where it's pretty intensive, where I'll have to talk for 7-8 hours a day, and be standing up. And in those trainings, I never eat until after. So I do 1 meal a day during those times. And that gives me a huge benefit once you're using ketones as a fuel source, because I can go from the time I wake up till after the training's done, and my energy level is basically the same. It's high the whole time. And in fact, I've seen people come back from lunch at those trainings, and people are saying, and they're just like passed out, and I'm just like, I have so much energy. In fact, that's something I've done at work is I say, hey, when I'm working, I'm going to eat 1 meal a day. Like I'm never going to eat at work. And that's actually helped me.
Exactly. Like it's like one of the advantages is the physiological, extra edge where your brain has this abundant fuel source, but partly it is also because of like food can turn into a complete distraction for some people. And if you have like if you have the, even if you have like this subconscious expectation of, waiting to get some food, or, waiting, okay, there's this vending machine down the corridor and I can go to it whenever I feel like it to pick myself up, then you're kind of also setting yourself up for more failure and, getting distracted by these different food-related indulgences. And like if you are keto, then even the aspect of carbohydrate restriction and saying to yourself that I'm not going to eat those foods because they're going to kick me out of ketosis and they're going to make me shift into like a glucose burning engine again, even that aspect is like more liberating and more freedom. It's going to give you more freedom just because of the restriction, and you don't have to like spend willpower or cognitive faculties on that either. You're completely like, I can focus on the things that I need to do, and I don't even have to worry about eating food, and I can safely go for hours and hours without running out of energy.
Right. So maybe we could talk now about different ways that you can trigger ketones as an energy source. So we've obviously been talking about a dietary way, which is called the ketogenic diet. This isn't a diet show, but it is just one way of doing it. It's probably the most effective way because you can maintain this state all the time. But not everyone, maybe doesn't want to switch their diet. That's fine. So there are other ways. And for those out there who are familiar with this, there's a gentleman named Dom D'Agostino who does a lot of research on exogenous ketones, which basically means ingesting ketones from an outside source, not using your own body fat for fuel, or using fat for fuel internally, but it basically you can drink them or something like that. So he's doing a lot of research right now with, he's been doing it with Navy SEAL deep sea divers. And when they get to certain levels of pressure underwater, they start having seizures. So he's actually has this government grant, I believe, and he's been doing this research with them and creating these kind of drinks that they can drink. And he's shown that he's preventing their seizures by these exogenous ketones. So an example of the U.S. military actually using this kind of an experimental way, but having good results with it. And I think that's kind of fascinating. So when I first started this in January, I would take some exogenous ketones because I felt it helped me jumpstart that kind of metabolic shift right from the beginning, And I'm not really talking about any brands per se, but I mean, I'm not involved in anything like that, but I would say it can have some benefits, especially early on, right? And if you don't want to switch to a ketogenic diet, then maybe taking some exogenous ketones, like there's ketone salts, ketone esters. Now, ketone esters are a brand new thing. They're not really that widely available in the market. but ketone salts are pretty much everywhere. Like there's one I take from time to time called Ketogenics Prime, which basically will put you in a state of ketosis within an hour. Normally it takes, up to 3 days or so of like doing pretty strict keto to get there, or fasting for newer people. So do you have any experience with exogenous ketones, and what are your thoughts about someone who's not doing a ketogenic diet, but let's say they took, as breakfast, right? Maybe they took this Ketogenics Prime or some other product that was going to put them in a state of ketosis without doing diet. What are your thoughts about that? Could that have any benefits?
Yeah, well, first of all, sorry. The first of all, like the exogenous ketones, yeah, they are like dietary supplements that have like these beta hydroxybutyrate salts, which is one of the main ketone bodies that you would naturally produce as well. So the effect of those ketones is that they're gonna raise the BHB concentrations in your blood for like just a little bit, and they will kind of put you into ketosis, but that's going to happen only like, let's say, for the entire duration of the supplement, and it's not going to be like long term. For people who are wanting to start the keto diet, then it can help to at first to kind of bump up the ketone in their blood, so that they could feel, or they could experience what it feels like to be in this ketosis state. But they will still have to be, adding the ketogenic diet itself as well onto the mix if they want to kind of become fully keto adapted, because like the exogenous ketones, if you take those supplements, then you're going to inhibit your liver's natural production of the ketone bodies. So whenever you take the supplement, then kind of shutting down the natural ketosis, so to say. And after the supplement wears off, then you will either go back into it, or you will either, go back into the glucose burning state, depending on your like level of keto adaptation. And it can be like a good way to have more ketones present in some situations, whether that be during exercise, whether that be in the case of people who suffer from like epilepsy and or diabetes, that they actually need to have like an alternative fuel source during some periods, and to kind of prevent the seizures, like the Navy SEAL divers as well. But for like as a general weight loss supplement, then I don't think that they work that well. They're not going to be promoting fat burning, or they're not going to be making you lose weight. The only way that can happen is that if they're going to help you to create a caloric deficit and like skip a meal. So in that sense, like if some people who just start keto and they want to lose a bit of weight, then they can take it in the initial adaptation period, but only if they're gonna add the ketogenic diet onto the mix, and they also gonna consume fewer calories, in a sense. They're gonna like basically use it as a meal replacement, like you said, to kind of take it in the morning and help to sustain like a fasted state for longer without having to eat a big bowl of cereal in the morning. But yeah, in the long term, they're not going to be worth it, in a sense. You can basically achieve similar results by simply practicing like daily intermittent fasting very easily, and taking something that is going to help to promote your liver's natural production of ketones as well, like MCT oil and the ketogenic diet. The foods that you eat, they will still produce those ketone bodies if you keep your carbohydrates low. So yeah, the exogenous ketone salts, they have their own place in some situations, but I don't think it's like a good idea to have them all the time, and you don't want to be depending on them. They should be taken as a short jet fuel, or a short ketone gel almost, that will raise your ketones whenever you need them.
So before I'm going to wrap up the exogenous ketone topic, but I would like to just present a scenario and get your thoughts. So let's say you have an Agile team where, one person is like, hey, I'm going to try this ketogenic thing, right? The other 7 people are like, no, I just want to eat my bread, right? Okay, so okay, fine. So let's say they all come into work, right? And they all as soon as they get in, they take this exogenous ketone supplement, like first thing, right? It's like the first thing they do. Do you think that doing this daily for most people without being on a ketogenic diet would provide any benefits, at least just at work? Do you think there is some kind of cognitive benefits it may provide?
Yeah, for sure. Like I mentioned, that the exogenous ketones will raise your ketone bodies in your blood, and you will experience this stable energy more, and you will experience also the anti-inflammatory effects of the ketones, and more stable blood sugar, and less hunger, and everything included. And you can also like even combine the exogenous ketones with even like a high carbohydrate meal. Like you can eat some rice or potatoes, but if you add like MCT oil or those BHB salts into the mix, then you're going to experience like more ketones, and you're still going to have like the carbohydrate food without crashing, basically. So that's possible. But yeah, the only thing would be that it would only last until the supplement runs out, and after that you'll go back into like a regular state, which is fine. Like most people don't need to be in like a very deep therapeutic ketosis, and they don't need to maintain it for the long term. And even if you do like, let's say you do one meal a day, but you do, or like 16 hours of fasting every day or something like that, but you do it on a high carb diet that doesn't restrict like carbohydrates, then you can still have like mild ketosis during the fasting periods, and you will still feel quite mentally clear and stable. You don't have to kind of trade off. It's going to be simply a bit more difficult for you to fast if you aren't in ketosis all the time. But yeah, both ways can work, and it doesn't have to be like this strict sacrifice for the rest of your life where you avoid all carbohydrates and all breads altogether. You can kind of hack it in a sense, and you can still gain a lot of the benefits by doing some daily intermittent fasting, and limiting your carbohydrate intake a little bit, and timing it in a certain time frame.
So let's get into that. So there's two other things you mentioned. One was MCTs, which stands for medium chain triglycerides, and the other one was intermittent fasting. So let's briefly touch on each and how. Let's start with MCT. So what the heck is that, right? And how does it produce ketones? How would this actually help with your cognitive ability, taking MCTs?
Sure. Like, well, MCTs stand for medium chain triglycerides. So they're these fatty acids with a medium chain length, and usually the other fatty acids are either long chain fatty acids or short chain fatty acids. So long chain fatty acids would be something like olive oil, and short chain fatty acids would be something like butter. And medium chain fatty acids are kind of somewhere in the middle with their carbon bond length. And the unique effects of MCTs is that they're going to be metabolized much more faster and much more effectively by the liver than the short chain fatty acids. Basically, they get transported into the Krebs cycle much faster, and they can be converted into energy. So they will definitely provide like a bigger ketone boost much faster than if you were to eat something with a shortened carbon bond length. And yeah, like usually people use MCT oils to kind of boost up their ketones during the day, and by either adding MCT oil into their coffee or sprinkling it over their foods or something like that. So that can be a good way to experience like a quicker burst of energy, and without because usually like the foods that you eat on keto, they tend to be metabolized much more slower because they're like more satiating, and they have like more fatty acids which are burning more slowly than carbohydrates. So the MCTs can be used as a kind of a boost. They're still ketotic, but they will give you like instant energy almost. And
okay.
Yeah, MCTs can be found in some other foods as well, like coconuts, and some coconut oil is also like a version of MCT, and butter also has a little bit of MCTs, but not a lot. And
Right.
the other way, which is like intermittent fasting, is basically the most natural way of getting into ketosis that hunter-gatherers would experience. They wouldn't do like deliberately the keto diet because they want to be consuming all the foods that they can get their hands on. But the ketotic state in nature would occur when you were to fast for like a few days and something like that. And let's say if you were to come off from a high carbohydrate diet, which hasn't done any carbohydrate restriction beforehand, then it would usually take like 2 to 3 days to get into this ketotic state of elevated blood ketones, because the body is quite very careful in terms of switching these metabolic pathways. But if you were to become if you were to practice more intermittent fasting, then that's going to basically deplete the liver glycogen faster. And once the liver glycogen runs out, then the liver starts to convert the fatty acids from either your food or your own adipose tissue into ketones. So yeah, fasting is like a very fast and efficient way of getting into ketosis. And once you become keto adapted, then the physiology of fasting and the keto diet, they're kind of very similar, and you have like very stable energy and elevated ketones and lower blood sugar without causing a crash.
So maybe we can define two things for folks who aren't familiar. Liver glycogen is basically stored glucose in your liver, and most people don't deplete that because they eat, they don't eat ketogenic diets or they don't fast, right? So most people, they're not depleting their liver glycogen. So only when your liver glycogen is depleted can your liver start producing ketones. Is that correct?
Yeah, like the liver can contain about 100 to 150 grams of glycogen, and usually it takes about 16 to 24 hours to deplete that by simply fasting or not consuming any carbohydrates at all. So and compared to like a regular way of eating, then that's like not a lot of glycogen, and you can easily fill it off by having like a big carbohydrate rich dinner with some pasta or potatoes or something like that. And usually in general, a regular standard unrestricted carbohydrate diet would be about 200 grams of carbohydrates usually, and it's very easily filled off. And like you said, once the liver is full of glycogen, then that's going to shut down the ketone production, because the body detects that, okay, we have like plenty of energy and we don't need to be in ketosis. We're going to burn the fuel that we ate. And in order to deplete the liver glycogen, you can either fast, eat low carb, with some only like vegetables and fiber, and or you can also exercise, like moving around, low intensity physical activity and cardio and things like that. They can also deplete the glycogen, which will then help you to get into ketosis faster as well.
Okay. So types of fasting. So a brief background. So we keep talking about this ketogenic diet, but simply put, in the modern world, it was quote unquote invented by it hasn't really been invented. I mean, people have been eating this way since the beginning of humanity, right? Just because they mainly ate, animals or hunters and gatherers, animals or whatever vegetables or fruits they can get their hands on that was growing in the wild, pre-agriculture, right? So, so that ketogenic diet is a pretty, our bodies evolved off and on using a ketogenic diet. That's why I think, using ketones as a fuel source to this day is, for some people, is so revolutionary, but from an evolutionary perspective, it's just a natural way of being, right? So, but back in the 1920s, I believe there was a doctor, and his name is escaping me, but I believe it was at the Mayo Clinic. And he was trying to, find how to help epileptic kids, right? And he found that if the kids just didn't eat anything for a few days, they were having reduced seizures. And he was trying to find out, like, okay, what is it about not eating that is helping their seizures? And he found that it was these ketones. Using ketones as an energy source for your brain was actually reducing seizures. So he tried to find a way to create a diet which would mimic this state of fasting without actually fasting. And essentially, he called it I don't know if he termed it the ketogenic diet, but that's essentially what we call it now. Now, what he created and what the mainstream people who do quote unquote keto do is pretty different. In the laboratory setting, it's not the same. It's very, very higher fat content than we normally would intake on a regular diet. It's like something like 90% or something around there from calories from fat. So I'm not going to talk too much about keto, but I just wanted to get into the idea that fasting itself, without diet, without exogenous, will create these ketones because you deplete your liver glycogen and then your body starts going to your stored body fat. So you have a very small amount of, let's call it calories, sitting in your glycogen stores for use, particularly your liver glycogen, compared to an almost unlimited a number of calories sitting on your body in the source of body fat. So body fat is literally just stored energy. Mm-hmm. And the way your body, when it creates energy from the fat, it creates these ketones. So that being said, not everyone wants to fast for days upon end, right? So for the average person, let's talk about intermittent fasting. Let's define that and talk about, the benefits of that when it comes to ketones, particularly, and how combining that with either diet or exogenous or even just by itself, how that can be beneficial. So maybe first we can just identify what do we even mean by intermittent fasting.
Fasting is basically the deliberate abstention from food where you're not consuming any calories, and eventually your body will shift into this ketotic state where it's going to be mobilizing all of the energy sources that it has stored in the body fat and other deposits. And basically intermittent fasting is a way of eating where you cycle between periods of not eating and eating, and also like time restricting your food intake. So there's like a slight difference between extended fasts, which would last for like several days. Then it's like intermittent fasting, which would include basically limiting your food intake to a certain hours during a day and spending the rest of the day in a fasted state. And time restricted feeding is also basically describing the same thing. So usually most people don't like to do these extended fasts all the time, and they simply choose to follow like a daily time restricted feeding schedule, depending on their situation and depending on their preference. And there are different ways of doing it. The most popular way is fasting for 16 hours every day and consuming your food within 8 hours. So basically it means that you either skip breakfast and have lunch and dinner, or you have like a very early dinner and like an earlier lunch break or something like that. It doesn't really matter. And it's like a very simple way of doing, and quite effective as well. And you can get like quite a lot of benefits from doing that. Then there's also like more time restricting eating schedules, like fasting for 20 hours, eating within 4 hours, or even doing like a 1 meal a day schedule where you fast up to 22 and 23 hours and eat just within 2 hours or 1 hour or something, depending on like the other circumstances. So but that's basically it. Like there isn't like a real magic behind it. It's simply not eating. Right. And not putting calories into your body, because once the body kind of detects the presence of calories, then it's going to shift into like a fat state, and it's going to trigger many like different metabolic processes that are basically telling that we've consumed food, we need to start the feeding cycle, and we're not going to be tapping into the other side of the coin, which would include like self-eating. Because if you are staying in a fasted state, then your body still, once it needs energy, and it's going to mobilize a lot of the old tissues and weaker cells back into energy to kind of keep itself going. So, but it has like it's not like a bad thing. It's not cannibalization, what it is, but it has been shown to have like many health benefits. And this process is called like autophagy, which translates into self-eating. And it's been shown to have like many benefits on longevity, especially.
Yeah, so ketogenic diet kind of promotes autophagy on its own, but if you combine intermittent fasting with that and any kind of extended fast, you're really ramping up that autophagy, which like Sim said, is basically, cell regeneration. And you can actually, it really can do things like boost your immune system. You produce a lot of human growth hormone. So your body, when you do this fasting, is intermittent fasting, your body actually produces more human growth hormone, which allows you to keep your muscle while burning body fat. So there's a lot of benefits from it. It's not just about calories. There's a lot of metabolic benefits and physiological. So I would like to I want to talk about one other thing, which is not on the agenda. But before we get to sleep, I just wanted to mention one other thing, and that's: are you familiar with NAD or nicotinamide riboside?
Well, it's like it's a like metabolic molecule or something like that that is said to be very energy boosting, and it's linked. It's called like the molecule of youth. So the body is always, detecting the ratios of NAD plus and NADH in the system, and usually whenever you're gonna tap into like a more energy deprived state, then you're gonna elevate NAD plus, and whenever you're consuming food, then you're gonna elevate NADH. So it's simply like a signaling ground for other metabolic processes and reactions. So the body will detect based on those ratios of, okay, do I need to go into more deeper ketosis? Do I need to start burning more fat? Or are we good? Do we have enough energy? So that's like basically it. And NAD plus is related to youthfulness, because the body becomes more efficient with its own energy production, and it has like it's going to improve the mitochondrial functioning of your system, which will then help you to live longer and fight off disease and get stronger and be more energized without needing to refeed yourself all the time. NAD plus can be increased by like exercise and cold thermogenesis and fasting as well to a certain extent, but also some certain foods, and they're going to help with that.
So there's a lot of studies coming out about NAD and how it's kind of the basic building blocks of all your cells. And how if you have higher levels of NAD, then people claim, now there's a lot of claims about this, so I don't know, but the term fountain of youth, in the sense that it will actually slow down your aging, because the higher levels of NAD you have, so with the younger you are, the higher levels of these you have in your system. And you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but the older we get, the more depleted we are of NAD. So there are companies out there who are trying to make all these NAD supplements. I think True Niagen is one of them, and there's Elysium and all these stuff. But I haven't seen any hard evidence that taking this exogenously will boost the levels in your system to where, I don't know how bioavailable it is. I don't know the benefits of it exogenously, but endogenously, which, your body making it on its own, we know that if you have higher levels, that essentially that translates to younger cells, right? Or younger self, put it that way. So there was a study that recently came out where they gave, there was a randomized controlled trial, and they gave two groups, one a control group and one another group of MCT oil. And they weren't on a ketogenic diet. They weren't even fasting. And the group that took the MCT oil, from the time they started, I think it was like a month, till a month later, their NAD levels were risen in naturally. Like their body was creating more NAD than the control group or than previously. So that goes to show that even and there's nothing so special about the MCTs that it's just helping to create ketones. So going back to ketones, I'm thinking like this is a hypothesis. I don't have the proof of this yet because the science is pretty new on it. But I'm even thinking that even ketone creation can help produce more NAD, according to that study, right? So,
I would imagine that to be possible, because if you are in ketosis, then you will improve your mitochondrial efficiency and mitochondrial density. So you will definitely have like access to more of the NAD stores in your body. just because of going into this ketosis state and burning fat.
So maybe I'll link that study in the show notes if people are interested. So last topic, I think for today, because we're running closer to time box here, is sleep. So let's talk about, we can talk about using ketones as a fuel source and diets and supplements and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, if you're not getting good sleep, I'm not saying none of this matters. It matters, but it will be greatly inhibited, right? Or you won't get your peak performance, right? Or you might not even get a good performance. So maybe we could talk about the importance of sleep, the role in it, and all of this, and then talk about maybe some tips and ways to optimize it.
Yeah, for sure. Like you mentioned, like sleep is probably the pillar stones of health, in my opinion. Like it's even more important than nutrition or exercise, because like literally, if you don't sleep, then it doesn't matter if you don't get enough sleep, deep sleep, then it doesn't matter what you do, or it doesn't matter how many supplements you take or how much coffee you drink, because your brain won't be able to repair itself, and everything. A lot of the repair processes and metabolic shifts and things like that, they happen during deep sleep, where your body is able to, or the body and brain is able to kind of self-repair itself, and even like the process of autophagy and things like that, they're also going to be mostly conducted during sleep. So yeah, definitely taking sleep importantly is critical for brain function and cognitive function as well, because even like small sleep deprivation will drastically lower your ability to focus, and it's going to also lower your self-control. It's going to lower your emotional bandwidth. It's going to make you more easily to give in to temptations, and to also kind of get more obese more easily because your body's become more insulin resistant. And even like a single night of poor sleep is going to make you more pre-diabetic, and like in the short term, and it's almost gonna simply promote like insulin resistance and weight gain. And yeah, it's like quite horrible to not get enough sleep. But in terms of like how to optimize it to make sure that you do repair yourself, is the first most important thing is to probably try to stick to a more consistent circadian rhythm. So the circadian rhythms are these day and night cycles that happen during the day, and our body also has different circadian clocks. The most important one, the master clock, is inside the pineal gland, and that's going to regulate many other smaller metabolic clocks throughout the entire body. And the main cues or the main signals that regulate those clocks have to do with food, light, and temperature and movement. So those are the things that kind of tell the body, okay, what time of the day is, what kind of metabolic processes do we need to go through, and do we need to sleep, or is it good enough for us to recover? And the light itself is probably the most important one. Like 90% of the circadian signaling is transmitted through the retinas in your eye, and it's mostly influenced by light. So the problem in the modern world is that we're exposed to a lot of blue light all the time throughout the entire day, and that can offset the circadian rhythms and offset the circadian clock. So if you expose yourself to blue light from let's say your smartphone, traffic lights, or the laptop screen, or something like that in the evening, then it's going to basically tell your brain that it's actually daytime, and it's going to prevent the body, or it's going to prevent the brain from going into like a deeper state of recovery. So that can cause a lot of issues, and there's a lot of research showing that blue light exposure at nighttime is going to cause like depression, autism, diabetes, obesity, and everything related to like not getting enough sleep. So that's like one of the issues why people should avoid watching their smartphone or something like that when they're next to their bed or in their bedroom.
Right.
And they definitely should try to limit their exposure to blue light in the evening by either installing some blue light filters onto their technology, and wearing like different blue blocking glasses, and dimming down the lights so that their brain could actually go into like this deeper state of REM sleep.
So my tip for that is I use a program on my Mac called Flux or Flux, however you pronounce it. That basically that turns down the blue light and makes it a lot more orangish, okay, for lack of a better word. And that's one thing I do. And the phone does a similar thing. It's called Night Shift on the iPhones. I think Android, I'm sure, has something like that, a blue light kind of dimming thing. And it does it on a timer. So once you get past like 7 o'clock, it starts to turn down the blue light. I also have blue light blocking glasses that I wear at night, a couple hours before bed. And so those are a couple of tips that I do. Is there anything else I'm missing as far as ways to help get better sleep that I just haven't mentioned? I'm sure there are probably, but anything that you do or tips?
Usually, it's also kind of important to expose yourself to natural sunlight during the daytime as well, as much as possible, to wake up in the morning when the sun is rising, and throughout the day, spend a lot of time outside where you would keep yourself in sync with the day and night cycles. So to kind of send a signal to your brain that, what time of the day is, and to keep yourself on point with that. And in addition to that, maybe not having or finishing consuming food at least like 2 to 3 hours before bedtime. That's like a last time you would want to be consuming food before going to bed, because if you do have a lot of food to digest, then it's going to take away energy from other repair processes, because digestion requires a lot of energy, and that can prevent you from getting deep sleep during the nighttime. So that's maybe like one of those things to look at. Then of course,
yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, you want to mention something, or?
Well, I was going to piggyback on that and say there's a guy named Dr. Sachin Panda who's scientist at the Salk Institute, and all his, well, I don't know if all of it, but a lot of his work at least is on circadian rhythms, like what we're talking about. And he mentions that eating, even when it's dark out, right, can have negative effects on your circadian rhythm. So I'll give a tip. So I use an app called Zero. It's an iOS app, but I'm sure there's something similar on Android. I keep saying that, but I don't have an Android. So, but the app is called Zero, and basically it's a fasting tracker, but it actually will tell you how much you've eaten at night, and you can track that too. So what it does is you'll say like, let's say I finish eating at 6 o'clock, right? And let's say someone wanted to do a basic 16-hour intermittent fast. Okay. So you would just push the button on the Zero app that says start fasting, and it would count that for you. But it would also track when you ate, because the app knows where your location and when it got dark, right? For instance, when the sun went down. So, and then it would tell you when it's 10 o'clock, which would be 16 hours, it would send you a little notification saying, hey, like your fast is up, you can eat now, kind of thing, right? And then when you stop it, it will tell you how much you ate at night. And then it gives you a day-by-day tracking of every day, like how much you fasted, and then how much, they call it, night eating you did. And then you can correlate that with, hey, like tonight I ate, like the sun went down at 6, the app told me, and I finished eating at 9, let's say, right? And you can see if that's affecting your sleep at all, because I have noticed that sometimes it does affect my sleep. So not only do I use that app for fasting purposes, because it just helps me kind of keep on track, and I like the little, I don't know, I like the reward of like,
checking.
I'm setting, like I'm setting these goals every day and I'm achieving them, which is motivating, right? And outside of that, I also now like seeing, okay, I'm also not eating at night, or this week I only ate at night like an hour or something. And that helps me with that. So, so sleep tracking is something maybe we can briefly touch on. So there's a couple. So this is one way I'm talking about when it comes to fasting tracking. Sleep tracker, there's some apps out there. Like I use one called Sleep Cycle, but I just bought the Oura Ring, and actually used your promo code. So maybe we could link that in the show notes, because I think I got like $50 off. So that's a pretty good discount. So essentially, maybe you can talk real quick about the Oura Ring before we wrap up, and if someone is really interested in sleep tracking and what that can
Sure,
do.
like I think tracking your sleep in some shape or form is like really beneficial because it can give you like real quantifiable data about how much time do you spend in different sleep stages, and how fast do you fall asleep, and how much do you actually sleep. So like a lot of people say that, yeah, I'm having sleep issues, or the opposite, that I'm sleeping very well. But if you look at the real data, then that's going to tell like a completely different story. So technology itself is very useful in these situations where it can give you like unbiased information about what you're doing and how you can use different habits and different strategies to optimize it. And I myself, I'm using the Oura Ring, which in my opinion is the best sleep tracking device, or at least like a commercial one that is currently out there. And they've received quite a lot of rewards for it as well. And they're from Finland. And what it basically does is like it's going to measure your heart rate. It's going to measure your heart rate variability, your core temperature, and in the end, and it's going to measure like the different sleep stages during the night. And in the morning, you can check your iPhone app to see how what's the score. They're going to give you like a really actionable score based on the night that you just went through. Like, today you got 78 on your sleep, and you slept like 2.5 hours in REM sleep or something like that, and it took you that many minutes to fall asleep. And you can use it to kind of see how different habits affect you. And I find it really valuable because it will not only like tell you what's the actual situation and what's the data, but it will also motivate you to pay more attention to these things. Because if you don't have like an incentive to improve your sleep, then you're not going to do it either. If you have like something that is going to keep you accountable more, then you will be more prone to making like better changes and better decisions, because like how different things affect you. And even like paying for purchasing it and using money, that can also be like an incentive in terms of like, okay, I already bought the ring, so why the hell won't I like make some drastic changes that will improve my health and longevity? So yeah, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, or like you're gonna set yourself up in a positive way to get better night's sleep. And it doesn't even cost like that much. It's I believe it's something like $300 or something, and like it's, in my opinion, it's well worth it, and really beneficial. And they're making the ring better all the time, and different updates. So yeah.
Awesome. So, one thing I forgot to mention is sleep mask. So I use something called a Manta sleep mask, and I find when I use that mask, like, man, it just, you're just into complete darkness, and you can open your eyes in the mask, so which is pretty cool. So it's not like I don't feel as claustrophobic, I guess, that way. But I mean, you kind of sleep like, I don't know. I've noticed a dramatic shift in my deep sleep using the Sleep Cycle app. I'm still waiting on my Oura Ring. They kind of have long lead times right now. So, so the time you order to the time you get it, it can be a few months. So I'm like halfway through the process, I think. But anyway, so I can't wait to get that ring. And I'll say lastly that something to look out for folks out there who might be a little overweight or very overweight, or even not overweight. Sometimes this can happen, is that a lot of people have sleep apnea and it goes undiagnosed. So I had sleep apnea for probably 15 years, but only diagnosed for 5. And I can tell you, I know it was really hindering my life and my performance before I got diagnosed. And I had to go on this CPAP machine and all this, and I had to use this machine. If I didn't use that machine, I would feel like a zombie all day. So, but I have good news that this past week I got retested, and now I no longer have sleep apnea. So,
well, that's good.
Yeah, so it's been it's kind of life-changing for me, and I've done it like so many, great benefits have happened in my life and others around me, because though I've been coaching and by actually kind of using ketones as a fuel source. And that's why I wanted to make that the first topic of the first topic of this biohacking series before we got into sleep and exercise and all these other things. So we are coming up on the time box. So I don't want to go without telling people like where to find you. I want you to be able to promote anything you want because I'm a big watcher of your YouTube channel. I'm a Patreon subscriber. I really like your biohacking stuff um, and those PDFs you created about meditation, and there's a lot of great stuff on your Patreon as well. So let's just run down the list. So where can people contact you? What do you want to promote? Just throw it all out there.
Yeah, sure. Like, thanks for having me on. But my biggest channels where people can find me is probably YouTube with Siim Lund. And other than that, my website is also siimlund.com. There you can also find a lot of information about the keto diet, fasting, and other biohacks, how to start it, and so on. My podcast is also Body Mind Empowerment with Siim Lund. So yeah, those are the main places you can find me.
Okay, and did you mention Twitter, or are you on Twitter?
Yeah, I'm like, well, like it's like Siim Lund on the entire internet. There aren't many other Siim Lunds I think of.
And in fact, I think that's just so people know, it's SIIM land, right? So that's how you spell Siim. So, and I think if there's a code, that's your Aura Ring code as well, right? SIM land.
Yeah,
so
Siim Lund.
Yeah. So if people are interested in that, I'll link that as well. So, all right. Well, I wanted to thank you for your time. It's really been a pleasure from my end. And thanks for all the work you're doing. And you put all this content out there for free that in the past wouldn't even really have been available, like to get all this information. So I think it's really fantastic. And I just want to say thanks. And thanks for coming on.
Yeah, it was my pleasure.